All righty. Well, thank you everyone for joining us today. My name is Jordan Suratan. I am the Northern Virginia organizer for the Virginia League of Conservation Voters. Virginia LCV is a statewide nonprofit organization whose vision is an equitable and just Virginia, where all communities can enjoy clean air, water, open space, and a livable climate, and not to mention a democracy that works for all Virginians. So tonight we are doing our first ever Clean Cars webinar. This is a myth busting and FAQ webinar where we're going to try to take your most frequently asked questions and common misconceptions and just break everything down for you when it comes to clean cars. First, let's go ahead and introduce you all to our esteemed panel of experts. First, we have Alan Harned. He's the Executive Director of Virginia Clean Cities. Charles Urena, who is the lead organizer of Drive Electric RVA, and Kim Germain, who is the Policy Director of Advanced Energy Economy. Alan has worked on transportation and energy-related issues in Virginia since 2006. Prior to being named Executive Director, Alan served as Virginia Clean Cities Business Development Director. He now serves as the Virginia representative to the 9-state Southeast Natural Gas Vehicle Corridor Committee and the coordinator of Virginia's initial 2010 electric vehicle readiness effort. Alan was also appointed to the State Advisory Board on Air Pollution in 2013. Thank you, Alan, for being here. Charles is the lead organizer of Drive Electric RVA, the Richmond, Virginia-based chapter of the Electric Vehicle Association. Through a variety of outreach and advocacy efforts, the group promotes electric vehicles as a fun, practical, and sustainable transportation choice. Charles's day job is managing the web presence of the research department at the Federal Reserve Bank of Richmond. And he currently uses the tools of storytelling and digital communication to make economics relevant to people's daily lives. And Charles earned his bachelor's degree in technical writing from the New York Institute of Technology in 1991. Thank you, Charles, so much for being here. And last but certainly not least is Kim Germain. She serves, as I said, as the policy director with Advanced Energy Economy for the Eastern region, with a primary focus on Virginia, Florida, and Illinois. She has a wealth of experience in state-level legislative engagement and coalition building. And most recently, Kim has led the effort to begin electrifying Virginia's state fleet vehicles. She's also engaged in the Commonwealth's adoption of the Advanced Clean Car Standards and the Virginia Clean Economy Act. Before coming to AEE, Kim served as the Virginia Director of Chesapeake Climate Action Network, and she previously held positions with the Virginia League of Conservation Voters and on several issue advocacy and electoral campaigns. Thank you, Kim, so much for being here. And actually now, Kim, that we are talking about you, would you be willing to give us a kind of brief overview of the factors at play when it comes to clean cars in Virginia?
Yeah, of course. So everyone bear with me because a lot has happened in the last few years in Virginia, a lot of it exciting. So I think I'll go over federal investment and action first, just because that's probably at the top of folks' minds. So over the last year or so, there have been two major pieces of legislation passed by the federal government. The first being the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, which, as you can probably guess by its name, represents a massive effort to invest in rebuilding America's roads, bridges, rails, and other important and vital infrastructure. Some of the most exciting components for transportation electrification specifically include funding to transition school buses and about $106 million in the National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Program. These funds are specifically meant to ensure a network of electric vehicle chargers that are interconnected and readily available to everyday folks. So building out along highway corridors and specifically in low income and rural communities as well. And then the other component is the Inflation Reduction Act. The Inflation Reduction Act is a massive federal bill meant to build the economy specifically. Notably, it includes billions of dollars in investment in climate and clean energy. This ranges from incentives to deploy large amounts of wind and solar, to incentives meant to bolster domestic manufacturing, to something as simple as helping everyday folks transition and make their homes more efficient. So it really encompasses a ton of investments meant to really reduce emissions and invest in our economy. For the purposes of today's conversation, it also includes not a new, but an extension or adaptation of a previous tax credit for electric vehicles. So the updated version allows for $4,000 for middle and lower income folks to buy electric vehicles, and up to $7,500 to buy new clean vehicles. So those are the major components of the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act and the IRA. The other component that's relevant for today is HB 1965, which passed the Virginia General Assembly in 2021. It was patroned by Delegate Bagby. This piece of legislation made Virginia, at the time, one of 16 states that opted into advanced clean car standards. These standards go into effect in 2024 and will gradually increase the number of electric vehicles delivered to Virginia by manufacturers. And you'll hear a ton more about clean car standards over the course of this conversation, so I'll leave it at that. And then the other component is the Virginia Clean Economy Act, which was passed in 2020 as a major climate and clean energy bill. The VCA ensures the retirement of fossil fuel facilities and the expansion of clean energy in Virginia. The legislation essentially creates a roadmap for Virginia to reach zero carbon emissions by 2045 and 2050, depending on the utility. It also includes utility and targets for utility energy efficiency. It lowers barriers to distributed generation for solar, and sets targets for renewable energy and storage deployment in Virginia. So it's really a holistic approach to getting Virginia to reduce emissions and get dirty energy off the grid.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that overview. I think that really puts into perspective all of the different, like we said, factors at play. And it also shows like why this is such a complex issue and why there's so much confusion around it, because there are so many contributing pieces of legislation. So that was wonderful. Thank you. And Kim, we're going to keep it going with you for our very first portion of the myth busting section of this evening. So for folks, just so that folks know and have an idea of how we're going to run these things, I am going to present our panelists with a common myth, and with their expertise and experience, they are going to debunk it for us this evening. So up first, Kim, we are going to say the first myth we've got going is Virginia is being forced to adopt California's clean car standards.
Yeah, so I'm sure y'all are hearing this a lot recently, but the reality is that when it comes to setting vehicle emission standards, Virginia and all other states really only have two options. Either it can comply and meet with federal standards or adopt standards developed by California. Essentially, California was granted a waiver to create more stringent and ambitious vehicle emission standards. As of this year, 17 states, including Virginia, have utilized their state level legislative and administrative authority to opt into the more ambitious clean car standards. In 2021, like I mentioned, legislators in Virginia reacted to consumer demand, signals from the vehicle manufacturing industry, and the fact that transportation accounts for the largest source of emissions in Virginia, and preemptively adopted these standards. Legislators understand what's happening in the marketplace. They understand the need to reduce emissions from the transportation sector. And they took a leadership opportunity by opting into advanced clean car standards. This was not forced upon us. It's something that our decision makers opted into, and it's something that many other states who want to be leaders in the electrification of transportation have also taken the opportunity to do.
Thank you so much. All right, so for our next myth, we're going to turn things over to Alan. Alan, we are dealing with a myth that says clean cars is a total ban on gas-powered cars, and I'm going to have to get rid of my gas-powered car when it goes into effect.
Thank you, Jordan, and it's great to be here with you and Kim and Charles. This is the fanciest background that I've ever seen, so I'm glad to be here with the backgrounds changing. These rules are a goal for manufacturer sales, and they start low and they ramp up over a decade. And so things, change will occur over time that are already in line with manufacturing commitments, with the goals from the automakers. Right now, it is these CARB states, it's the ACC2 states that are the states that have these rules get the vehicles, and states like Virginia that have a delayed enactment for the rules, folks have to drive to Maryland to get the vehicles. So in effect, you were forced to, or these dealers are forced to sell gasoline cars to as many Virginians have to go out of state to get them. So initially, manufacturers under these rules will sell some electric cars. That is a huge point of progress for the Commonwealth, for the dealers to be able to get them. Instead of losing those customers, losing those sales to Maryland, folks will be able to roll forward. And then by 2035, manufacturers will be selling lots of zero emission vehicles or buy credits to sell higher emission vehicles of some type. But vehicles live for 15 years. So if you want to hang on to your vehicle for hundreds of thousands of miles more, there's certainly space there. But I don't know why you would. Actually, gasoline vehicles are a big problem in the Commonwealth of Virginia. I think Kim mentioned it. They're our leading source of our greenhouse gases. They're also a leading source of our community emissions, things that hurt our brains and that harm us and that kill people and cause asthma. A gasoline car is about 20 pounds of CO2 per gallon, and we pay out the nose for that fuel. Electric vehicles are something that people are going to want to experience. If you're charging them at home, it's $1 a gallon equivalent. So there's just all sorts of benefits. So people will probably want to get rid of their gasoline car in the years ahead. Clean cars enables the sale of electric vehicles.
Thank you so much. All right, for our next myth, we're going to pass things over to Charles. Charles, if I buy a new car in the next few years, will I have to trade it in for an EV? Does clean cars mean that I won't be able to buy even a used gas car again after all this goes into effect?
Yeah, so I'll reiterate the point that Alan made, which is that the Clean Car Standards refers to the sale of cars, not the purchase. So there's nothing in there that says you have to buy an electric vehicle or that you have to get rid of your gas car. So and people, when they come up to me at the different events that we do, they say, "Oh, I don't want anybody taking away my car. I just bought a car, and Alan said, they last 15 years if you take good care of it." So, and I will talk to people and say, if you have a gas car right now and it's performing well for you, and you just bought one, unless you have a reason, it's better to get that utilization out of the vehicle. As opposed to junking it and polluting the environment that way. But the whole point of the Clean Car Standards is to open up a new market. And I will say, people have gas cars going forward, and in fact, people have. I mean, you probably, I've met some folks that have like classic cars from the 1950s and 60s, and in fact, some of those folks are deciding to convert them to electric because they like the idea of taking an older car that maybe they're not getting as much use out of, maybe the engine's not performing as well, and they want to electrify it so they can get that instant torque and the performance that an electric motor provides. So You know, we'll be seeing those gas cars for a long time to come in. They probably have an electric motor underneath the hood.
So thank you so much. Yeah. All right. So keeping things moving. Kim, we're going to throw things back to you. Our next myth says that repealing Virginia's clean car legislation will protect the grid. The grid can't handle the transition to electric clean cars.
Yeah, so this is a relatively easy one because people always point to California and some of the problems that they're having in California as the boogeyman. But it's just not a apt example because Virginia participates in PJM, which is a regional transmission organization. California does not participate in a regional transmission organization at the time. The PJM is a massive territory of energy generators, more than capable of meeting and exceeding energy needs, even when they account for load growth associated with electric vehicles. It's considered one of the most resilient grids in America. And the increased use of managed charging technology and time of use rates will also allow us to adapt to more electric vehicles being on the roads. The other thing is, like Alan said, these standards happen very gradually over time. In 2024, when Virginia's clean car standards go into effect, we're just going to be seeing the manufacturers deliver 8% of what they deliver to Virginia will be electric vehicles. Even when we get to 2035, there are still going to be used vehicles on the road. People will still be able to drive their vehicles, like everyone has said, to their internal combustion engine vehicles. And so this transition just isn't going to happen overnight. And then the final thing that I will say is that through the Virginia Clean Economy Act and other legislation that passed in Virginia over the last decade or so, and through massive investment from the federal bills I outlined earlier, we're going to see a ton of money flowing down for grid resilience, transmission, and interconnection. And so as this transition is happening to serving more offshore wind, solar, and allowing for the growth of an electric vehicle market, the federal government and states with climate goals have adapted. And so they see the need to ensure that our grid and transmission infrastructure is keeping in alignment with those standards. And so we're going to see a ton of money coming to Virginia to make sure that our grid is resilient and adapting to the shift towards renewable energy.
Thank you so much. Alan, did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
I just wanted to add that this is a really great opportunity for people to agree. We do want to keep an eye out for the grid. And what's really great is that this technology with these batteries that can charge at different times, they don't need to be charged every day, can actually help balance the grid. There was a lot of talk recently in some of the political circles about how a California demand event, where there was California hit the highest amount of electricity they've used in a weather event, and they sent out a voluntary note to remind people to unplug unnecessary appliances. That wasn't about electric vehicles. That was about overuse of the grid for all sorts of things, air conditioning, all sorts of technologies. And electric vehicles are a perfect example of something that all the users of the technology and everybody who's sort of planning a vehicle can sort of think through how much energy they need to use. You don't need it to constantly be charging. It's actually got a limited capacity to the battery, just like your cell phone. It stops charging when it's full. But also, you really only need enough power to do the trips that you're planning before you can charge again. And so sometimes I charge my vehicle once a month. And so the concept of the California grid faltering over electric vehicles is just not real. And so it's really exciting that this technology can add to the grid so significantly. We're seeing school buses already deployed in the hundreds in Virginia that provide power back to the grid when we need it. And so there's some great technology, some great innovation for affordability, reliability, and clean energy ahead.
Yeah, thanks so much for pointing that out. Yeah. All right. Well, we're going to keep this rolling. Kim, let's throw this back to you. Something that we're hearing a lot is that this switch to clean cars is going to be super expensive. So some of the things that we're hearing are clean cars are going to cost Virginian families more money. So the natural next move would be to repeal the clean car standards, and that's going to improve our economy.
Yeah, so this is another one of those things where I think perception is everything. The reality is that the gap between the upfront cost of new gas-powered and electric vehicles is rapidly declining. Over the next couple of years, we're set to see price parity. So if you go to a dealership and you're asking for a comparable electric vehicle, new electric vehicle and a comparable new gas vehicle, you're going to be paying the same price over the next couple of years. So that's really good news. As electric vehicle technology advances, it becomes more affordable to produce those vehicles, and in turn makes it more affordable for everyday folks to buy those vehicles. The other thing that I'll say is standards like clean car standards mean that over the next decade or so, you're also going to see more used electric vehicles. And so when we get manufacturers to deliver electric vehicles to Virginia, there are always those people that lease vehicles or they like to change up their vehicles. And as those folks decide to sell their used electric vehicles, we're going to see a robust market of used vehicles for folks. And that's the biggest segment of car buyers, is folks that are looking to buy used vehicles. So that's another exciting opportunity. And then, like I said earlier, we're going to see a ton of money coming in from the federal government to incentivize the purchase of electric vehicles, up to $6,000 or $7,500, I think I said, for the purchase of new electric vehicles. And so you're already going to see a moment where electric vehicles and gas-powered vehicles are the same price comparably. And then with the federal investment in incentives, you're going to come out on top if you're buying an electric vehicle. And then on top of that, owning an EV saves the typical driver $6,000 to $10,000 over the life of the vehicle, because you're saving on the cost of gas, maintenance, and all of that. And so with the incentives, with the cost of ownership being lower for an electric vehicle, you're set to save about $10,000 to $15,000 by owning an electric vehicle. So if for the folks that can afford it, it is actually a massive investment.
Great. And Charles, can you talk about, Kim mentioned saving on maintenance. I think people seem to think that because of the technology involved in an electric vehicle, the maintenance and upkeep for those vehicles is going to be more expensive. Is that true?
It isn't. And several people have looked at this, Consumer Reports, AAA, and just anecdotally, I can share that. And it makes sense, that an electric vehicle has fewer moving parts in its drivetrain compared to a gasoline powered vehicle. So there's fewer things to have to worry about repairing or replacing. You don't have spark plugs. There's no fan belts. There's no muffler. And so and I'll just give the anecdote that I use. So I went electric in 2014, and I've had 2 EVs since then. And the first EV I had for 7 years, and the biggest expense was getting new tires, which I got when I sold the car last year. So I hadn't had to refill the windshield wiper fluid. There's no oil to change. The electric motor has oil sort of within the device, so it's supposed to last the lifetime of the motor. So which is actually, and I would say that it not only is less expensive in terms of cost, like money out of the pocket, but in terms of time. The more one even when I talk to appreciate the fact that They come home, they plug their car in. They don't have to make a special trip to a gas station to refuel their car. Oh, I'm running a little bit low. I got to make sure I take care of that on my way home or when I'm going off to work the next morning. But an EV, if you're fortunate to have the ability to install a charger at your home, you can just plug it in, and depending on the car, your charge overnight will be done in a few hours, and you unplug before you go to sleep. So, and then you get up the next day and you're ready to go. And to Alan's point, you have a car with a larger battery, you can go quite a while before you have to recharge. So, people always say, well, it doesn't take a while to charge the battery, and so, well, you just walk over and plug it in, and you walk away. That's how long it takes to actually do it. So there's definitely some time savings in addition to the actual cost out of pocket in terms of the long-term maintenance and operation of the car.
Thanks, Charles. Alan, can you address sort of the idea that whether it be because of supply chain demands or just in Virginia, we haven't had, as you guys pointed out, a lot of any EVs being sold. People have to go out of state, all that kind of thing. How is it going to, how is the market going to fare? Are there going to be enough EVs on the markets when all these standards go into effect?
I think that's a really good question. And we can't fully predict the markets, but programs like this help set the market. They help set a path forward. And so if you think about maybe the challenge that we have in Virginia, and there are still plenty of Virginians that can buy vehicles from dealers or that buy vehicles through online services directly from the manufacturers. That's where a lot of the sales have already moved towards, especially for this technology, or through online sales from folks like Tesla, which sell a lot of the Virginia vehicles. But the the tail end of this question about when I'm forced to give up my car, you will not be forced to give up your car under these rules. That is not a part of the program at all. What this does is it allows and enables the sale of vehicles. But I wanted to flag that, like, even when, right? So like maybe in at the midpoint of the century, like 2050 is when there'll be less used gasoline vehicles for sale, but you'll never be forced to get rid of your car. By 2025, all Mercedes-Benz vehicles will be electrified. Mitsubishi plans to have 50% of their vehicles as electric by 2030. Volkswagen, 50% electrified, totally electric by 2030. BMW, 50% by 2030. Nissan, 40% by 2030. General Motors will be ZEV only, so zero emission vehicles only by 2035, right? That's when the full thing starts to set in, and that's years from now, right? These are announcements that automakers have already made. Jaguar will only be electric after 2025. Land Rover has said they plan to be 60% by 2030, and then General Motors, Ford, and Stellantis, which is like the Fiat Chrysler brand, plan to be 40-50% by 2030. And so it's like this change is happening as fast as these regulations lay out. And the question is, will we have a market at all? Will our dealers be able to get these vehicles, or will they not be as easily accessible to our marketplace? And so people can buy vehicles, but it's such a much smaller percentage. And then you can't get all the models that the states that have this regulation enact, which is why the dealers need this and want this. And there's going to be more that we'll have to do to build that market. We'll have stations, we'll have other programs to help people, but yeah, no one's going to take your car away. And this is coming from the markets that plan to sell it.
Yeah. So it sounds like, what you're saying is that, just to sort of recap your last point, the manufacturers and people who determine what the market looks like are already heading in this direction, which kind of leads into my next myth/question, which is, say you're someone who is for repealing the clean car standards, right? You don't want to see this advancement in Virginia. Does that mean that, if for some reason the clean car standard is repealed, will that stop or prevent advancements of sales of EVs and, advancement in EV infrastructure in Virginia?
It'll make it less convenient for people trying to purchase these. It'll maintain that inconvenience of having to deal with online purchases, having to deal with waiting at your dealership, and then maybe guessing on a price for the vehicle that you've ordered online that has arrived, and now the dealer wants to sell it to you at a different price than what they had on maybe what they would have if they just had vehicles on the lot. There will be, I think Kim mentioned it, there's billions in federal infrastructure. There's a 30% infrastructure tax credit. There's a $1,000 homeowner tax credit. 40% of Virginians have access to electricity within 20 feet of where they park. So like a lot of people are going to be able to charge at home and might not even need that much infrastructure. So we're going to be moving all that forward. Repealing clean cars does not, it just makes it less convenient for Virginians to move forward with this technology that the manufacturers already aim to do. This is teamwork. And so this is part of the team. We're going to need to do more, but it'd be taking a player off the field in a team activity.
Yeah,
Thank
Jordan, can I jump in here? So just to emphasize Alan's point, he listed all of these manufacturers that are transitioning the vehicles that are coming off their manufacturing lines, right? They've made these commitments. It's going to happen. It's going to happen rapidly, because for a manufacturer, a corporation to make the decision that in the next 5 to 10 years, they're going to completely change the way they do business, that's pretty transformative, right? So I think that's a massive signal. And so what's happening right now is that manufacturers deliver electric vehicles to the states that have clean car standards. That's just the fact. It's easy for them. They have mandates. They have to send electric vehicles to those states. It's really easy. They pencil out the math of this is how many vehicles we have to send to the 16 clean car states. And it's really simple for those manufacturers. If Virginia repeals clean car standards, it's not going to change the manufacturer marketplace, right? That train is already down the rails. It's happening. Transition is happening. What it is going to do is make it increasingly difficult for Virginians to get electric vehicles at their lots. And when electric vehicles are the largest portion of any vehicles that are coming to a state, you're just changing the total vehicles that you have access to, because manufacturers aren't going to be making internal combustion engine vehicles in 10 years, right? And so if we say no thank you, we're saying no thank you to the only vehicles that they're going to be manufacturing in about a decade. So it's not just about does anything change, it's about us not having availability here in Virginia.
Yeah, thanks. It's limiting our choice.
Yeah, I just wanted to add something real quick to that, which is that, I totally agree that, the market, I think we've passed the tipping point, or we're at a tipping point for, we're not going back to a world where there aren't electric vehicles. So the question is the pace of that. And if you are on this webinar, you're probably concerned about climate change. And so, the sooner that we shift to electrification and renewable energy, the better. Hopefully we can do something to kind of at least create the train crash from being too bad at this point. And so we can dilly dally and say, well, the market's just going to do what it's going to do, and it will. But clean car standards, the whole point of it is to put the foot on the accelerator, so to speak.
Yeah, thanks, Charles. Thank you all. Yeah, that was really helpful. All right, Alan, let's kick it back to you. I've got another common misconception for you, and that is electric vehicles are only accessible to rich people. A person with an average income can't possibly afford an electric vehicle.
And I'll say that electric vehicles are in a very early market, about 1% in the Commonwealth of Virginia. So it might seem it's like an elite accessible thing that's only within reach of a few folks. But there's some really great resources out there. Fueleconomy.gov is a very good resource where folks can actually look at the vehicles that they would consider, really any used vehicle as well. And they can compare the fuel from that. And it is a trade-off. Of course, $100,000 Tesla or, $100,000 Lamborghini is going to be out of reach for folks. But people buy the Ford Explorer, and you could buy plenty of electric vehicles for less than the Ford Explorer. People buy a range of different vehicles, and electric vehicles do cost on average, $10,000 to $12,000 more, but not on the individual vehicle. If you were to look at the different makes and models, I mentioned General Motors. I mentioned that Stellantis is planning, Chrysler will have a whole bunch of 400, 500 mile vehicles soon, and there'll be a range of different prices and points. And so it's not easy right now. We're in a very difficult marketplace for all, like everything, but definitely for vehicles because of the chip shortage. But the technology is there. A lot of people buy larger vehicles for their to carry more luggage or more groceries, and it's very worthwhile to compare them side by side on fueleconomy.gov. And I'll just say that, like, gas hit $5 a gallon. Electricity at home is $1 a gallon equivalent, and so you can sort of balance that out. You could balance that into your lease, and so that's instantly saves somebody. If they're borrowing for their vehicle, they already will save significantly on their monthly payments. You could maybe save $300 on your monthly payments just in fuel price. And so all those things, it's hard now at the 1%. Once these rules go into effect and these vehicles are accessible, the marketplace will look a little different. These used vehicles are going to be great. There's all sorts of options ahead.
Thanks. And this is for any of you to address. In talking about price and accessibility, in terms of cost, I think all of you have mentioned these incentives and rebates that are a part of various pieces of legislation. How does that apply? How does it work specifically for people who are trying to buy an electric vehicle?
So the incentives are applicable sometimes on the dealer financing. They're all going through some changes right now at the federal level as the IRS sort of sorts out the different items. And they are also going to have several different rules and tiers, both for the price of the vehicle and for the income of the individual. All that will need to be worked out through some online systems. And it all changed. Back in August, it was $7,500 per vehicle. And now there's several different tiers, and there's also going to be tracking on the amount of minerals and where the minerals come from, whether it's domestic or otherwise. Fueleconomy.gov or the dealerships will have information about those tax credits. And I'll just encourage folks that there is no tax credit for a gasoline vehicle. You may still be able to compare them apples to apples. If the tax credit seems confusing, you might not need it. There might be a way to just look at the raw numbers as well. So sorry that it is going to be a little confusing. IRS and some of these other partners like fueleconomy.gov, which is the EPA and the Department of Energy, are going to really need to get their act together to detail it right now. Right now, it's self-reported from every manufacturer if they get the credits and what level of credits that they get. And those are detailed from the federal government on fueleconomy.gov.
Thank you. All righty, for our very last myth of the evening, Charles, I'm going to kick this to you. The last myth is that EVs aren't practical. they take forever to charge. And say you're someone who likes to go on a road trip, it wouldn't be possible to do that.
Definitely I'll answer this one based on my own experience and more general information. I mentioned earlier that I've owned an EV since 2014, and it's basically been my commuter car. So going to and from work every day, taking my daughter to soccer practice, shopping, all that other good stuff. The average American drives less than 30 miles a day. And so pretty much every electric vehicle on the market can cover that distance with no problem at all. Road trips are more possible than they used to be, thanks to the bigger batteries and the fact that there are more charging stations for non-Tesla owners. Today's EVs on the market can go more than 200 miles on a full charge, and they can charge faster than they used to. Electrify America recently is launching or starting to roll out its next generation chargers that can charge as fast as like 150 kilowatts or 350 kilowatts. So in practical terms, that would mean delivering 100, 200 miles of range in less than 10 minutes. So you're talking about the time it takes for you to go and get a hoagie at Wawa and come back to your car. So it's pretty close to what you get for going to a gas station. So the technology is there to achieve that kind of experience that people are used to with a gasoline car. But I think also it's good to think about, I don't like to shy away from the fact that, EVs, electric vehicles, they're not gas cars, right? It's not the same. I mean, it has a wheel, it has 4 wheels and a steering wheel and all the things that you expect in a gas car, but the way in which it's built and the way it operates is different. And for lots of people, that difference is great. It's quieter, it has the performance, the instant torque, and all, and lower maintenance and all that other stuff. But you also have to say yes. The fueling experience is different. And in some ways, that's good. I mentioned earlier that you can charge at home and wake up every morning with your car ready to go instead of having to go to a gas station. It's like your cell phone. I always use that example. Is that it took a while for cell phones to kind of take off. I think folks in particularly in Asian countries were way ahead of us in adopting those, but now everyone's got one. And so I think this is the thing with electric vehicles is that it's a different way of looking at how you get from point A to point B, but it's practical. I mean, like I said, I've had one for 7 years, and there's millions. The percentage of EVs it's a niche that started out at 1% of the market. It's now up to 5%, and that niche has only been growing, and that niche would not be growing if it was not practical.
And I'll just chime in on the practicality. I've worked with alternative fuel vehicles, so I have access to a lot of different EV chargers. But at home, I use a 110 outlet to charge my car, and I've done that for a decade. And it's just not difficult. Each electric vehicle comes with a charger in the rear of the vehicle, and unless you're driving hundreds of miles a day, you can actually get by really, really easily. So it's extremely practical instead of ever going to the gas station, paying a whole bunch of different profits.
Gotcha. Thank you guys so much. All right, so we've now busted a couple of myths, which is awesome. And now we're going to go to the Q&A portion of our evening. People have a lot of questions. Thank you to those of you who submitted a question ahead of time. When you signed up, we want to get some of your questions answered. And then, of course, lots of you have been submitting questions as we've been having this conversation. So we're going to get to as many as we can, but you guys have a lot of questions. So we may have to do something else, some sort of part 2 or a follow-up or something to get all your questions answered, but we're going to do our best. The first sort of common theme that I'm seeing in a lot of these questions, both from folks in the audience today and pre-submitted questions, is, Virginia is one of those states that has a really wonderful mix of highly populated urban areas, suburban areas, and vastly rural communities. How do you all foresee, EVs and EV infrastructure affecting particularly the rural communities in Virginia? Do you think that, it's gonna take longer for that infrastructure to get out there? Would folks in those areas where you're going to have to do a lot more driving benefit from maybe hybrids? How does that work under the clean car standards? What do you guys have to say in terms of how all this is going to work for our rural neighbors?
And so I'll chime in first that I'm from Harrisonburg, which is inside Rockingham County, and we have the greatest opportunity to benefit from cleaner transportation, lower cost transportation fuel if we're using bigger vehicles and doing longer trips. Rural Americans, which is most of Virginia, stands to gain and benefit a whole lot more. You think about looking at how much you are spending on fuel and how much you're utilizing to operate these vehicles. Yes, you might not want something like the Mitsubishi i-MiEV that came out, 10 years ago as your rural vehicle, but it gets to the point about how Ford with the F-150 Lightning or Stellantis and the Chrysler vehicles that are going to all have a 400-mile range, how much that will save rural Virginians. It will be transformative. It'll be of great, great value. There are larger vehicles coming. There's good things happening. And I see it, and it's in the math. So the concept here is not that these, even in urban areas, those users might be teleworking or walking or utilizing an effective transit system or riding an e-bike rather than doing a electric vehicle. In our rural areas, there's a massive amount of money that can be saved and a great amount of community benefit from folks. And rural Virginians sometimes also pay higher prices for their motor fuel. And so it's a way to really balance those out. There are bigger cars coming also. So for rural Virginians, for rural folks, those big trucks, people are going to be gobbling them up.
Yeah, I'll chime in here that I really think that I want to first of all just really acknowledge the voice of folks in rural communities that hear us city folks talking about our EVs and driving around in our e-bikes and e-scooters, and they're like, yeah, but that's not the life that I live, and this is not relevant to me, and why are we forcing everybody into this direction when we're not thinking about all the folks that are living in rural communities? Like you're saying, most of Virginia is rural. And so there's definitely, I think, with the federal infrastructure money that's coming in, the way it's going to play out in Virginia is that a lot of that money is going to initially go to these alternative fuel corridors, which in Virginia are designated as interstate highways. And so if you look at a map, you'll see that like the middle of the state is left out of that, because there's not interstates running through them. What about all the busy state routes? So, I mean, the good news is that, VDOT has stated that once they build out those corridors, their next priority on the list of using that federal money is to build out those state routes. So that's really good news, and something we should definitely keep an eye on as an advocacy community to make sure that as VDOT and the state is spending the money, that they don't concentrate it all in metropolitan areas along interstate highways. And I'll add that there's even opportunities along interstates too. For some of the charging districts that exist in some in urban areas. But again, I want to just circle back to that I hear that a lot of people at our events about that they live. I live in a rural community, even a suburban community that's kind of far away from the city center, and that doesn't get a whole lot of investment in anything. Like there's not a Starbucks in every corner. There's not a whole lot of retail development, and that's where a lot of the private investment in charging infrastructure, your Electrify Americas and your charge points, that's where they focus their attention. So, the state, I will say that Virginia had an opportunity to fill those gaps in rural communities with a program to fund charging. And unfortunately, that bill did not go anywhere. So I would encourage folks to really, if you're in a rural area, talk to your representative and say, I don't want our community to be left out of this. There's opportunity, we need that infrastructure and that investment as well.
Yeah, I'll say really quickly that even in model year 2035, when clean car standards reach their peak, a full 20% of the vehicles on the road will still be, or the vehicles delivered to Virginia will still be able to be plug-in hybrid vehicle. So like we've been saying this entire time, this change isn't going to happen overnight. The other thing that I will say is Virginia is set to, we keep talking about the massive federal investment, but the big component that we haven't talked about is that all of these programs and the funding are must meet the requirements of the Justice 40 initiative, which essentially say that at least 40% of the benefits of federal investment must flow to low income and otherwise disadvantaged communities. And when it comes to programs like NEVI that are meant to build out infrastructure, yes, we're going to see investment in highway corridors, but we're also going to see investment in rural communities because of the Justice 40 initiative. So that's a major component. And then the other thing I will say is just 5 years ago, you were seeing electric vehicles with a maximum range of 150 to 200 miles, and now that's more like 200 to 500 miles. So the landscape just has completely changed. And like Charles said, we don't want to diminish the experience of folks in rural communities, but the landscape is just changing super rapidly.
Yeah, thank you all so much. That's really important to keep in mind. And actually sort of continuing the conversation of, communities that often get left out of the conversation on a myriad of issues. We get a lot of questions from renters, folks who don't own a home, who don't have a garage with an outlet that they can plug their car into. How do you propose that, someone who is renting embark on having an electric vehicle? Like, how would they charge their vehicle?
Good question. I'll answer that really quickly because I know we want to get some more questions. The two pieces of it are, how do you, if you live in an apartment, you don't control the property, right? So you don't have a, unless it's if you're in a condo or a condominium, the Virginia law actually says that you have the right to request a charger and it be installed for your use as long as it's a reasonable cost. But if you're living in an apartment building where you don't own it, what do you do? And there's two pieces to that. One is it really emphasizes the importance of public charging, particularly public, not just the DC fast chargers, which would be useful in terms of as a community resource, but also level 2 chargers and even a simple outlet. I'm a very strong advocate of sort of charging everywhere model, where imagine going to McDonald's or you go to the grocery store, you go to the library, and there's charging that's everywhere. So if the charge, because there's electricity everywhere, right? And so if you could be able to have the opportunity to build out that sort of lower level infrastructure in addition to all these DC fast chargers that people are talking about, then that becomes less of an issue because you basically just charge as you go. And then, you worry less about, oh, well, when I get home, what am I supposed to do? And also the other piece of it is workplace charging. That's I think an area where, we can encourage employers to have charging, because if you think about it, that's really the other piece of time where your vehicle is sitting doing nothing is when you're at work. And so being able to have access to charging at that point, I know people who rely on that because the opportunities at home are lacking. So I think those are the two things to sort of look at with apartments. And then hopefully, we have the point in the future where as new apartment buildings are built, that they install the charging infrastructure. EV readiness requirements in the building code would be a nice incentive or a supporter of that kind of movement, because it is a upfront cost, but it is cheaper to do that actually than doing retroactively. So.
Yeah, thank you. All right, I think this might be our last question, depending on how this conversation goes. But I wanted to pose to all of you, I think sometimes in this conversation, the idea of wanting to fully get away from fossil fuels can kind of get lost in translation, because certainly, running electricity is much better than having a gas powered car, but there are, pollutants and environmental impacts of using electricity the traditional way anyways. There was a comment slash question from one of our audience members that talks about how they charge their EVs with solar panels from their roof. How can we incorporate renewables into this conversation of electrifying or cleaning our transportation systems?
Well, I'll just say, as someone who just went solar at my house a month ago, that there is a lot of extra capacity in the models for cost effectiveness for home solar. If you think a little bit about your transportation fuel costs, transportation fuel is about 4 times what you're paying for other energy sources in your home. And so there is, for the folks who are doing it increasingly in Virginia, there's a lot of home solar, solarized groups. There's folks that are doing that at home. And then as far as also community solar, what's really interesting about, or wind, right? We have a Commonwealth that is going to have 2.6, gigawatts of wind going offshore. These vehicles can charge when the power is the lowest cost. They can help balance out that renewable energy. So it really is a great 2-step dance. And most of the folks who are doing solarized installations are very capable of doing a simple electric vehicle charger installation for very low cost while they're solarizing properties, et cetera. So it's a great community builder.
Yeah, and I'll jump in here just really quickly. This is one of those areas where some of the policies that we've passed over the last few years really work in tandem, right? So right now, the fuel mix is a little different than it's going to look in, or the energy mix in Virginia is a little different than it's going to look in 5, 10, 15 years. But what that means is that as we get more solar, wind, energy storage online, the cleaner that electric vehicle becomes, right? So it's already much cleaner than an internal combustion engine vehicle is, but it's only going to become more efficient over time. And so that's one of those areas where folks will say, well, we're using this dirty energy mix, which in Virginia is going to become less true because of policies like the Virginia Clean Economy Act. Electric vehicles already are obviously more efficient than traditional vehicles, and that shift is going to happen a lot more as we clean up our grid by investing in renewable energy. So it's just one of those areas where everything works together perfectly.
Thank you. All right, so we're pretty much running out of time, but I do want to ask you one final question because I think it's an important one. With the new energy plan that's come out, there has been a huge emphasis on switching to nuclear energy, and that nuclear energy is the best way or the only way to ensure the resilience of the grid. What do we as a group have to say in response to that plan?
I think there's a emphasis on maybe innovation or some sort of grants and job creation envisioned for Southwest Virginia, maybe some brownfields work or something, but it's not necessarily clear that it would benefit the grid. It's more of an economic play to create some sort of new technology. The grid by law will be balanced because everybody's planning and working on it, and we have a whole number of different tools in our toolbox beyond nuclear. Certainly an interesting time to talk about micronuclear or whatever, like the miniaturized units, and it might be trying to also capture some federal funding in that area. There's also so it's like, it might not be about the actual result. Maybe it's more so about posturing for those jobs or those federal programs.
Right. Well, thank you all so much. This has been a really wonderful conversation. Thank you to everyone who logged on and joined us this evening. I really appreciate it. I hope that we all learned something or heard something that, maybe cleared up a misconception we had, but it has been my pleasure to moderate this for you. Thank you so much to our panelists. You all were fantastic. And everyone have a great night.